is a demonstration of value drawing. So in looking at this setup, one of the things I want to do is to increase my level of what I want to call drama. And one of the ways to do that is to overstate my darks. In this area of the drawing, I'm kind of in the reflective part of the drawing now, where I'm starting to look at it and pay attention a little bit to what's it doing. Is the drawing doing what I want it to do? And I wanted to use as much of the page as I can. So those of you who, when you have clipping devices or things, you can always work your drawing. You can always work your drawing to the edges. I like to be aware of my overall composition. But once I've done that, one of the things I want to do is to really create a couple of centers of interest. And the ways that you create centers of interest is using drama, using value. I want this white. I want this shell to pop. However, I'm about to build this gray area on this side of the shell, which is away from the light source, okay? And I want to highlight that, but if I do that, I lose this contrast. So I'm going to work this up a little bit. Notice I'm using my left hand again. Don't try this at home without adult supervision. So I'm really densifying that, and then I'm going to take my paper towel blending tool, which is somewhere around here. And take my hand and start to work this into the paper. Changing the drama of this drawing by getting rid of as much of the white of the paper that sort of pokes through. Yeah, it gets a little messy, sure. If you can think about it this way, in charcoal drawings, you can just think about the white of the paper is kind of your drawing ta-da, and the ways that you work your materials into the tone of the paper, the texture of the paper, can really create this illusion of drama. It's kind of like in theater, oftentimes on a stage, when somebody's going to say something that's quite poignant and dramatic, sometimes there's a pause. There's a moment there where you're not expecting that, or you're setting the stage for that. And I'm going to use this towel to sort of work in some of my grays, work in some of those tones. And I remember I said I wanted to work the edge, this edge, away from the shadow. So I'm going to add a little bit of tone over here. Because I don't want this white. I don't want this white at all. I don't like the streakiness of this right now, but I'll be able to deal with that once I have the paper toned. Some artists use what's called the chamois cloth. Any of you who might work on cars might know what that is. But it's the micro cloths work really well. Those sort of microfilament cloths that they sell to polish cars or cleaning up excess wet. So I'm going to very carefully take a look at these on the shell on the left, these little peaks. Okay, I want them to be my highlights, and I got 2, I got 3, I got 4, And as we start to get into the fifth one, it starts to curl under just a little bit. So that part is away from the light. Okay. I'm going to go back to this little blendy stick thing. And I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to the sort of the cool little striations in the nautilus of this shell. One of the things that you might begin to notice is that as you do this, you start to create the illusion that this is a dimensional object, that this thing lives in space. It's not just a flat thing anymore, as with this one. So I'm going to come over here while I'm working on these little nautilus points, and I'm going to start to pull on these just a little bit. And there's another one there. I want to sort of just figuring out where they are right now, and my finger is helping me do that. I'll spend a little more time there in a few minutes. But again, one of the things on my overall strategy is to get rid of a lot of this white, the white of the ground, so that the figures emerge from the ground. That's my goal here. I'll spend a little more time over here, sort of softening up I'll do this with my left hand so you can see it, but softening up the little tufts, little peaks over here. There's one over here like that. And they actually have a life of their own too, because they kind of go down to the next level. And we see them in contrast because this negative space behind the positive space of this shell really there's a shadow there. I want to grab that shadow because that's going to help us to ground this shell. Okay? Grab that shadow shape. Now I'm using a piece of vine charcoal again. That's just by choice. You could be using anything, just because it's soft enough and malleable enough, I want to make sure I know where this shadow is. And once I start to put that shadow into place with this softer charcoal, I can take my charcoal, my compressed charcoal. Notice I was using vine charcoal, and I can reinforce those darks. And I'm actually working them into the paper just a little bit. You might even be able to see little sprays of the material as I was pushing it into the paper. It's a good opportunity to demonstrate something to you guys too, is that when you draw, you're leaving behind little tracings, little crumblings of the material that you're using. I like to think about it in a way that kind of you're leaving a little bit of material behind by choice, sort of describing the form. Excuse me. Describing in the clearest way that you can the form that you are rendering. There was I'm a musician also. There's a guitar player. Some people think of him as a folk musician who I admired a lot, named Richie Havens. And Richie would play so aggressively on his 12-string guitar that when you looked closely, if you went to one of his shows, you could actually see almost pieces of the guitar sort of being left behind as part of his music process. Little pieces of splinters would seem to like fly off the stage. I always thought that was pretty cool. So you can dive into this a little bit more here. I want to densify that just a little bit, not too much. Okay, and don't forget, again, you are creating an illusion, a representation notice that word, of what it is that you're observing. You're just leaving behind notes and tracings. And to kind of underline that, one of the things to remember is that even if you could make the most amazing drawing that you've ever thought you could possibly make, that fooled the eye in a way that somebody would think, oh, look at those shells, that is so naturalistic, so real looking, it would never be that thing. It's always a simulation of that thing.